Hello friends, today I am going to share my understanding of the ideas of Inscape and Instress of Gerard Manley Hopkins. I say that I am going to share my understanding because now I guess you would understand when I say that Gerard Manley Hopkins is a difficult poet. Most students tend to skip the poems of Hopkins because they find it often very daunting and intimidating. When I was a student, that's exactly what I did too. I remember that for my PG we had to study the Wreck of the Deutschland, and I don't remember a word of what I studied then because I don't remember enjoying Hopkins then either. The Windover was okay, but the Deutschland was a difficult one. And this idea of Inscape and Instress was something I had to grapple with, but yet couldn't fully understand. So today, for the sake of this video, I decided to talk about Inscape and Instress, and I am only trying to tell you what I have understood of these two terms. I do not claim that this is exactly what Hopkins must have meant by the terms. I am trying to get nearer to Hopkins, and in my attempt to understand Inscape and Instress, I also have realized that I have begun to understand something of Hopkins, and it has come as a revelation to me that Hopkins is such a wonderful poet that his poems can really be enjoyed, that you don't really have to run away from Hopkins's poetry. I am grateful for this revelation. And so let me try, before I tell you about Inscape and Instress, let me just tell you something about the poet G.M. Hopkins. He was born in 1844 and he was raised in a very prosperous family, and a family that was very refined and sophisticated, and an artistic family too. His father used to draw well. Two of his brothers became artists later on, and a family which was which used to read a lot, and so all that learning was instilled into this child right when the time he was young. And he grew up he to join the Balliol College, Oxford in 1863. He studied the classics there, and he was a very brilliant student. And later on, he decided that he was attracted towards Catholicism. And when he read John Henry Newman's treatise on why he converted to Catholicism, he was very much interested in that. And later on, he too joined the Catholic order, and he decided to become a priest. And in 1867, he entered a Jesuit novitiate near London. And even before that, when he was a young boy, he had started writing poetry. And now when he became at least a novitiate to become a priest, he decided that he would not write poetry anymore, because he had taken the vows of poverty, chastity and obedience. So he felt that the practice of writing poetry is too individualistic and self-indulgent, because writing poetry gives the poet a lot of pleasure, and so he felt that it was sinful to indulge in his own pleasures when he has devoted himself to the service of God. So he stopped writing poetry, and not only that, he burned all his earlier poems. But then he continued to write journals in which he recorded everything that he felt and saw around him. And he decided, as I told you, he decided to write no more unless it were by the wish of my superiors. So unless my superiors tell me to write, I am not going to write poetry. That is what he decided. And then from 1875, for a long time, he did not write poetry. Later on, when he was 31 years old, there was this shipwreck in which 5 Franciscan nuns also were killed, and so one of his superiors had asked him to write a poem on it, and he wrote the poem The Wreck of the Deutschland. But unfortunately, no publisher was willing to take it up. It was sent to the Jesuit publication called The Month, but then they refused to publish it because his prosody and his poetic style was very, very different from his contemporaries. Now, we tend to consider G.M. Hopkins as a modern poet. Maybe you tend to classify him along with T.S. Eliot or Yeats or some such such poets. But then the fact remains that he was a Victorian. He was a contemporary of Tennyson and Arnold and Robert Browning. But then, because of the difference, the distinctive difference in his prosody and in his ideas of poetry and in his diction, he simply was not included in the Victorian line of poets. During the 9 years he had spent in preparation for priesthood, during that time he was introduced to Duns Scotus, the writings of Duns Scotus, who was a medieval Catholic thinker who lived in 1265 from 1265 to 1308, and the teachings or the principles of Duns Scotus made him rethink his decision about not writing poetry, because Duns Scotus believed that he argued that individual and particular objects in this world were the only things that man could know directly. And so he felt, Gerard Manley Hopkins came to this realization that it was actually not wrong to interpret the world from his individual a perspective or point of view, because you had to look at the world from your point of view, and that was the only way that you could look at the world. And he spent anyway, he did not write until, of course, he was asked to write the poem The Wreck of the Deutschland. And then after his training, or 9 years of training, he was ordained in 1877, and for the next 7 years he was given the duty of teaching and preaching in London, Oxford, Liverpool, Glasgow, Stonyhurst and many such places. And so it was in 1875 that he wrote this poem, The Wreck of the Deutschland. And after that, he again started writing poems, though it was not published. He was not very keen on getting his works published either. He was a very detached person, a very spiritual kind of a person. And in 1884, he was sent to Dublin, to the Royal University College in Dublin, as a professor of Greek, as a professor of the classics. But then he was very unhappy there, because being a thoroughbred Englishman, the Irish life and the Irish culture was something he couldn't really kind of adjust with, and he was not happy with the politics. We know that Ireland and England were always at political loggerheads, and so his ideas, the political ideas and ideologies didn't really match with the people who were his colleagues, and so he spent a lot of he was quite unhappy in Dublin. And then what happened was that he fell sick. After a few years he fell sick. He was affected by typhoid, and it was during this time, these unhappy years, it was at this time that he he wrote some sonnets which were later called the Terrible Sonnets, because that was a time when he doubted whether God really heard him. He addressed God as Sir, somebody who is capable of hearing him, but somebody who was unwilling to listen to him. He was quite worried by the indifference that God showed towards him, in spite of his devout sincerity in his pursuit of God. But in spite of all that, he continued to keep up his spirits. He did not give up. He continued his faith in God, and finally at the age of 44 he contracted typhoid, and in his deathbed it is said that his last words were, "I am happy, so happy." So that is So that is about the life of Gerard Manley Hopkins, and a very saintly person, I should say. So he lived and died a very spiritual kind of a person who saw things that ordinary people could not see, because the others didn't have the time or the patience to, but he had. He was spiritual in every sense. He believed and he adored God for his creation, and he believed that in every single leaf, in the blades of grass, in the flowers, in the mountains, in the glaciers, everywhere he believed that he could see and sense the presence of God. And his poetry was actually a form of adoration for this immense power of the Creator, God. So, so when we look at Hopkins in this light, we start understanding what he means by inscape and instress. Hopkins's idea of inscape and instress is not something new. Indeed, the Romantic poets, the Victorians, the moderns, and the post-colonialists, colonial poets all feature these moments of revelation, though they call it by different names. Now, Wordsworth, for instance, called it the spots of time. He has spoken about these certain spots of time when nature revealed the divinity within it to him. So that is what he means by spots of time. And Emerson calls the very same thing moments. And he says it is these personal experiential insights. There are some moments when life is revealed to you. James Joyce called the same thing by a different name. He called it epiphany. And this is the definition that James Joyce gives to epiphany. It is the moment when the soul of the commonest object seems to us radiant and may be manifested through any chance, word or gesture. It is a coming to or a realization. And I came across a kind of a term that says it is the aha moment. It is the moment when you suddenly look at something and say, oh, aha, this is what it means. You've been seeing this all these years, but it never occurred to you, and now suddenly it reveals itself to you in all its glory. Okay, that kind of a moment is, so this it is called the epiphany, and this is there in all these Romantic poets and all of them. And now coming to Hopkins, because he was a very religious person, his inscape is fundamentally religious. Now, by inscape, what he meant was that it is not just his definition. Let me give you a couple of definitions. Some people say that it is the soul and the spirit of a thing. Hopkins liked to believe that every single object in nature was distinct. There would be hundreds of trees, but then one tree is not another tree. That tree has a thisness, okay, a thisness, T-H-I-S-N-E-S-S, a thisness that is particular to that tree alone. And so that is here it says a thisness of a thing, in its particularity, not in universal terms. When you tend to look at things in a universal way, you tend to generalize things. But here it is looking at the particular of a thing. And he says there is W.H. Gardiner. I am just going to read the definition of W.H. Gardiner for this idea. A name for the individually distinctive form, made up of tangible qualities, which constitutes the rich revealing oneness of any natural object. So that oneness, the thisness, that is exactly what Hopkins was interested in. And Hopkins himself has said, all the world is full of inscape, and chance left free to act falls into an order as well as purpose. Inscape is the outward reflection of the inner nature of a thing. So that's a very interesting idea. So it is the outward reflection of the inner nature of a thing. So there is there is this defining quality of a thing. And Hopkins believed that a poet should be able to discover the inscape of things. And for him, the Instress is actually the kind of the epiphanic moment of epiphanic experience of James Joyce, or the moment of Emerson, or as you would call the spots of time of Wordsworth. That, I feel, is what he means by Instress, because it is this Instress that reveals the inscape to you. So when a poet writes a poem, what he tries to do is, he tries to portray this inscape of the thing about which he writes. And when a reader reads the poem, he actually should experience the same Instress which the poet felt, so that he can also see the inscape that the poet saw. Now that is how I have understood inscape and Instress. Now just let me give you some examples. And again, for Hopkins, because he was a very religious person, inscape again was something that was fundamentally religious. And it was founded on this theological belief that God never repeats himself. Okay? Let me repeat that sentence once again. God never repeats himself. That means every single creature that God creates, be it a leaf or be it a flower or be it an animal, it simply cannot repeat itself. That means every single thing is unique, and finding the uniqueness is this process of Instress, and that defining that uniqueness is the inscape. And he says that the glimpse of the inscape shows us why God created it. Okay, and Hopkins believed that inscape is the essence of poetry. And then I just came across a sentence written by Emerson, and this is the sentence, a very short one. The earth laughs in flowers. The earth laughs in flowers. And suddenly can you see the inscape there? The earth laughs in flowers. Flowers symbolize happiness. Flowers signify happiness. They are external manifestations of the earth's joy. And that is why he says the earth laughs in flowers. I guess I have a feeling that Ralph Waldo Emerson, in this one sentence, has traced the inscape of flowers, the very purpose of why God created flowers. He created flowers to show the happiness, to express the happiness of the earth. So that is how I have understood the idea of inscape. And Hopkins, he believed that every single creation has behind it, it reveals the hand that crafted, the divine hand that crafted it. And he believed that there is an inner law that governs everything in this universe. And in one of his journals, he has made this entry. He had been observing oak leaves, oak, O-A-K, leaves of the oak tree. And he writes in his journal, I have now found the law of the oak leaves. It is of platter-shaped stars all together. The leaves lie close like pages packed as if drawn tightly together. So the law of the oak leaves is that it is a platter-shaped star, and they are all strung together. And again, he marks out records and observation on the very common bluebell flower. And he says, I do not think I have ever seen anything more beautiful than the bluebell I have been looking at. I know the beauty of the Lord by it. Its inscape is mixed of strength and grace, like an ash tree. So the inscape of the flower, the very humble, small flower called the bluebell, he says that the inscape of this flower is strength and grace. Because the plant is able to withstand the rains and the cold and the wind, it is strong. At the same time, it is so beautiful, so graceful. So the inscape of this flower is a mixture of strength and grace. So this is how Hopkins looked at everything around him, with so much joy, with so much gratitude. And in everything that he saw God, and he exalted in the glory of God. So that is about Instress and Inscape. That is all that I can give you, because this is what I have gleaned from my readings on Inscape and Instress. And I should not forget to mention a lecture by Dr. Tony Goldsby Smith. And I would suggest that people who are interested in Inscape and Instress, mainly Inscape, he talks only about Inscape, you should listen to this 1.5 hour lecture by Dr. Tony Goldsby Smith. It is so revealing. For me at least, it helped me to understand this concept of Inscape. So with this understanding, I hope to do more videos on a couple of poems of Gerard Manley Hopkins. So let's meet then in the next video.